This is what Eugene Peterson, I mentioned the pastor Eugene Peterson that had us write a little note to Wendell Berry books that we would send out to pastors that Eugene was mentoring. Here's something Eugene says about Wendell Berry. He says, I have long ranked Wendell Berry among my most trustworthy guides as I have picked my way through the distorting and corrupting seductions of American culture. For 40 years, in a succession of novels and poems and essays, he has been reordering my Christian imagination to cultivate totalities, to live life as a spiritually organic whole.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the 3 Books from Hearts and Minds podcast. My name is Phil Schiavone with the CCO, the Coalition for Christian Outreach, where we are transforming college students to transform the world. And with me, the host with the most to say about the books you ought to be reading from Hearts and Minds Bookstore, Byron Borger. Byron, how are you doing today?
I'm just fine, Phil. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's October. It's the month of my birthday. The Phillies are in the postseason. It's pumpkin spice everything. I'm actually one that is a fan of pumpkin spice being in everything in August. Bring it on. Pumpkin spice all year round. How about you?
I thought you'd like that, and I know you like October, so that's pretty cool.
Love October. What about you? Are you an October fan? You like pumpkin spice in your stuff?
I don't pay much attention to pumpkin spice, but as a matter of fact, I love October. It is just getting crisp. September can be pretty warm still, so it's almost like summertime. And then you get into November and it's snowy and bleak sometimes. So I love October. Yeah, it's one of my favorite months. And we go out and do a couple of book displays and conferences in October, one for small churches called the We Kirk Conference. So I love going out and doing things in October and being at some church camps and the opportunity to be in the woods and stuff and seeing the leaves change. It sounds like a cliche, but I really do like October.
Well, yeah, I don't think there's personally anything cliche about it, even though sometimes October gets that rap every now and then. But one thing that you and I immediately connect with, whether it's pumpkin spice or it's the leaves changing color, is this reality that is based in creation. And I believe one of our favorite authors in the CCO and in the Hearts and Minds world, Wendell Berry, has a new novel coming out, and there's a new focus on him. What do you got there with Wendell Berry?
Oh, you are exactly right, because fall is a great time to think about Wendell Berry because he writes so much about farming and harvest and crops and so forth. He's a rural agrarian essayist and poet, and he has a brand new novel coming as this is dropping, as this episode is appearing. It may have just come out yesterday as we're recording this. It's coming out next week. The novel is called Marce, M-A-R-C-E. That's a guy's name, Marce Catlett. And those that know Wendell Berry's novels know that all of them are set, and his short stories mostly, in a fictional town in Kentucky. And it goes back to the early all the way up to today. Chronologically, his characters are interrelated. And so you learn about the families and the neighbors, or what he calls the membership. Some people may not even know they're part of the members, but everybody cares for each other in this commonwealth in Kentucky, the Port Williams community. It's a rural farming community, and people come and go. And Andy Catlett has a novel called Andy Catlett, and his mother was Hannah Coulter. The Coulter family and the Catlett family are related. There's all these different folks. Jayber Crow is a famous novel, one of the most famous novels of our time, Jayber Crow by Wendell Berry, and Hannah Coulter is one of our most favorite. But the Catlett family is picked up in this new one that's forthcoming called Marce Catlett. And it's about tobacco farming. And they go on a long journey. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm gathered they go on a long journey to Louisville, where a corrupt buyer pays only pennies on the pound to the tobacco sellers. And the farmers are left high and dry. They can't even pay for their crop. And so they're left in indentured sort of servanthood. And they decide to do something about that. They form a growers cooperative, sort of a farmers cooperative, so they can have some clout against the greed of the big buyers. And Andy grows up hearing this story of his grandfather, Marce, and is with him when the wagons, as they're going to Louisville, and watches this happen as a boy. So this novel is just coming out, and it's part of this continuation of the Port Williams membership and these families of rural, lyrical sense of place, beautiful writing, duty, and a concern about your family and your place and your faith in this a rural community and to how it changes with the rise of technology and modern farming and all that. So that's the backstory of who Wendell Berry is in his fiction. On Sabbath days, he walks through the woods and writes poetry. And several volumes have come out recently of his Sabbath poems. And so Wendell Berry is known in the poetry world for his Sabbath poems especially. And then he writes essays, and that's probably where he's won the most awards as a contemporary essayist. Climate change activist and writer Bill McKibben, who teaches environmental studies and the literature of ecology at a college up in Vermont. Bill McKibben says he is the most important writer writing in our time. So Wendell Berry, whether you like his fiction, whether you like his poetry, or whether you appreciate his dense essays about ecology and a sense of place and the sort of agricultural life, Wendell Berry is an important writer. So what I'd like to do today in our podcast, Phil, is I'd like to try to tell people 3 books. I can't pick 3 of his nonfiction. I can't pick 3 of his fiction. I'll pick 3 books that are written by other people about Wendell Berry, so you can see how important he is, how to get into his writing, his broader work and his story and his own farming life, because he really is a farmer in Kentucky. And so his own biography features into his writing. And these are my 3 favorite books about Wendell Berry.
Great. Well, lead us right in. Go for it.
Okay, well, the first one, and you may not know too much about Wendell Berry, Phil, but this is a great one for anybody to begin with. It is called Wendell Berry and the Given Life. The Given Life. It's written by a guy named Ragan Sutterfield. And I don't know, Phil, if you remember, some of our CCO friends know a farm out in western Pennsylvania that a former CCO guy started called Lamppost Farms. Lamppost, thinking of the Narnia portal. And Lamppost Farms, caring about land and butchering well and treating animals in fair ways. He brings Ragan Sutterfield out to speak at this Lamppost Farms in western Pennsylvania because he's written about farming and land and place. He's an Episcopal priest and a farming writer about creaturely life. And Ragan has been greatly inspired by Wendell Berry. And I think maybe Ragan's even spoken at Jubilee, at our Jubilee conference for students already. But he has been inspired by Wendell Berry, so he wrote what I take to be the most accessible introduction to the work of Wendell Berry that is in print. It's published by Franciscan Media, which is a Franciscan Catholic publishing house. Wendell Berry and Ragan Sutterfield, neither are Catholic, but the Franciscans published this. And it makes sense when you think about St. Francis and his love for ecology and his love for peacemaking and his love for animals and his love for nature. It sort of speaks to who Wendell Berry is. And this book is called Wendell Berry and the Given Life. And it starts off with a chapter that Wendell Berry, a phrase he uses about the life you are given. That everyone is given. It implies a giver. It implies a God. It implies a purpose and a destiny. And we make something of the life we are given in our own place. It also speaks to something that Wendell Berry would probably, maybe he wouldn't call it this, but what biblical people would call humility. The virtue of realizing that being small is okay. We don't need to change the world in the big sense of things. We need to be responsible and care for the things we do. But we're given a certain kind of life, and we just have to steward that well to be a part of the place and the people that God has put before us. So the given life and the art of being a creature is very much that we have a limitation and boundaries, and we are called to put our hand to the things that we're to put our hand to. So this notion of a given life is the first chapter, and it's just brilliant. The very next chapter is, in fact, humility, about coming to terms with reality, who we are as small creatures in God's big world. He looks at love and affection, what it means that we should care for things. He looks at economics. He looks at work. He looks at Sabbath. He looks at stability, which is an old Benedictine phrase for the monks. The rule of life would be stable, by which he means content with a sense of place, that you're not always moving around trying to find a bigger and better rung to climb, but that you become content in your own digging into your own neighborhood and blooming where you're planted, so to speak. So the stability, becoming a native person, caring about the place where you are in this age of everything and everywhere. In the internet, you can be everywhere at once. But in fact, in real life, you can only be in one place, and we should be attentive to that. He looks at this notion of membership. I've already alluded to that in Wendell Berry's novels. He talks about the commonwealth in which people live and share their commonwealth as a membership. Whether you know it or not, you're a part of a member of this community in Port Williams. And he says that's how we should view our towns and our communities and our churches, as having authentic sort of relationships where we're members. And so we have loyalty to one another and duties to one another as we try to be faithful in our sense of place. So anyway, this Wendell Berry, The Given Life, is a great, great resource that helps us understand who Wendell Berry is. He's in his 90s now. Who he is as a writer, what his stories capture, what his essays imply, what his poetry even points us to. And they are all these themes that Ragan Sutterfield describes so beautifully in this great book. I have the hardback in front of me here. The hardback's out of print. It's now a paperback, sells for about $19, I think. It's a lovely, lovely gift and a great book for anybody that wants to say, who is this Wendell Berry guy? Why does he write these deep essays and these prophetic warnings about industry and technology? And why is he Amish? Well, not quite, but he is sort of a small is beautiful kind of guy with a more local sort of sense of resisting the allure of high-tech world and speed and efficiency and kind of a longing for the old days in a certain sense. So yeah, that's who Wendell Berry is, and this given life is a theme that I think is just brilliant that Ragan Sutterfield captures nicely. You may not be much of a farmer, Phil, over there in Shippensburg, but I think you have a real sense of place. You love your town. You are committed to your sort of living in place. You got Wendell Berry themes in your own life right there. I know you do.
Yeah, and I'm definitely intrigued by what you're saying, having not really read Wendell Berry much myself. But just even the call to one place, the call to the one vocation have deeply impacted the choices I've made with my life, with my family's life, with with my vocation, and then even I don't have a very liturgical expression to my faith, but I've found a sense of liturgy in things like coffee, like recreation, even like board games. There's this sense of like honor of like what a gift I've been given in getting to hang out with my friends and play board games. There's this like worship that wells up in me to God in these things. And that's the sense I'm getting with Wendell Berry here too, is that he's grounding us in a place of things and of thingliness, if I can make up a verb / noun.
Creatureliness.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, this world of things. That's absolutely right. His novels, are laden with great examples of people that pay attention to farming, to place. The novel Jayber Crow, a lot of people think is his favorite. Jayber, his real name is Jonah in the story, and he wants to go to seminary, and this is before World War II. He goes to seminary, and he realizes he's not sure what he believes about Jesus and so forth. He's not sure, and he decides to kind of come home in defeat, and he becomes a barber. And his laying hands on people's heads, his speaking and listening to them as they tell their stories, his care for the community. It's almost like a priestly function, a liturgy of caring for people. My old friend Eugene Peterson would sometimes order Jayber Crow, the novel, and ask us to mail it to pastors he was mentoring, and said, just put in a little note that whenever Jayber talks about the barber chair, think of your pulpit. When you're climbing up in the pulpit to share God's word, to bless God's people, just whatever Jayber says about that incident as a barber, like think of your vocation as a pastor in that kind of way. Eugene Peterson would also say, whenever they talk about the farms, and there's two different farms in that story, one that's being cared for in kind of older ways, one which is being sort of abused by a capacious guy that wants to grow and expand and be more efficient, and he kind of ruins his family, doesn't care for his wife because he's working so late at night, and doesn't treat the land and animals very well either. So there's a kind of a good farmer and a bad farmer in this Jayber Crow story. And Peterson said, anytime you see the land being described, think of your own congregation and how you're going to care and nurture and steward for your place. So yeah, the things, whether it's headlights on a tractor or whatever, are described almost lyrically in these stories, and they're commonplace things, but the kind of way in which it becomes holy in some ways, or desecrated as it may be, is really something. So you're onto something. The thingliness of creation the creatureliness of our limits, and the joys of paying attention to common life and simple pleasures. That's exactly what Wendell Berry's about, and I see it in your life right there, Phil. Well, I'll tell you what, the next one I'm going to tell you about fleshes this out even more in a way that we in the CCO describe. For folks listening in, that aren't part of the CCO, Phil and I are affiliated with this organization, the CCO, and we work with college students and try to help college students think through their own majors and their vocations as avenues to serve God, to bless the common good of the community by having a holy sense of calling in their work. We do basic discipleship and evangelism and worship and service projects the way any other campus ministry would do. But we are also been influenced by this tradition of developing a Christian imagination for all of life, what we used to call a worldview, where we think in terms of God's good creation being so wrecked and ruined by sin and idolatry, but being renewed by the lordship of the risen Jesus. And so our story of the biblical narrative of creation, fall, redemption really does shape our calling to work with students in this particular way that the CCO describes. Well, two friends of ours that have shaped the CCO, they were at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto with Al Walters, who wrote the book Creation Regained, where CCO got a lot of this vision for our own ministry 40-some years, 50-some years ago. They studied with Al, and they were reading Wendell Berry before he was a fad, before he was well known in many circles. Wendell Berry is like a hero to many of us now, both for his essays, his poetry, and his fiction. But back when this book came out, he was still not as well known. But these guys up at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto, who came to Jubilee to share this stuff with us 25, 30 years ago, wrote this book called Wendell Berry and the Cultivation of Life, a reader's guide. And it is a reader's guide to Wendell Berry's essays and poetry and novels up to that point. Now, the book with Jayber Crow had just come out, and that was about as far as it goes. So it's a tiny bit dated. But for as far as it goes, looking at Wendell Berry's early books, his very first book was written, I think he was 27 years old in 1960, and he wrote Nathan Coulter. And the story begins kind of a lyrical sense of place there, but a harsh story about a harsh family and harsh land living in poverty. It's a hard rural story. Nathan Coulter, a short story that he wrote, a novella back in 1960. From that point on, this traces his career as an essayist, as a prophet, as an environmentalist, and as a poet. Wendell Berry and the Cultivation of Life. Matthew Bonzo and Michael Stevens. They were both at the Institute for Christian Studies and then now got jobs eventually at Cornerstone University in Grand Rapids. I don't know if they're both retired now. I think Matthew Bonzo is retired, but they both are really good writers, really good friends, and they tell the story here of what Wendell Berry is all about. I think it is my second favorite book. If Wendell Berry and the Cultivation of Life is the most accessible intro to Berry, this is my favorite sort of semi-academic, it's not super academic, but semi-serious study of really what Wendell Berry is all about, his view of creation, his view of cultivation, and they link that to almost what we might want to call in the CCO a reformational worldview, this creation, fall, redemption story, and the patchwork quilt of his work, and how it kind of shapes us, whether you're talking about his poetry or his essays. It has a real nice bibliography that's kind of chronological and says he is a necessary voice. Listen to this. This is what Eugene Peterson, I mentioned the pastor Eugene Peterson that had us write a little note to Wendell Berry books that we would send out to pastors that Eugene was mentoring. Here's something Eugene says about Wendell Berry. He says, I have long ranked Wendell Berry among my most trustworthy guides as I have picked my way through the distorting and corrupting seductions of American culture. For 40 years, in a succession of novels and poems and essays, he has been reordering my Christian imagination to cultivate totalities, to live life as a spiritually organic whole. So that's what Wendell Berry says about, that's what Eugene Peterson says about Wendell Berry. And then these guys begin to flesh that out. Norman Wiersbe, who was good friends with Wendell Berry, teaches down at Duke, says, over the past 50 years, Wendell Berry has given witness to a vision of our life together that is proving to be indispensable and prophetic. Bonzo and Stevens have gleaned a rich harvest with this vision, showing that Berry's voice is one today's church cannot ignore. Wendell Berry and the Cultivation of Life is an excellent introduction and guide for those seeking a better, healthier, saner world. So even Norman Wiersbe, who knows Berry's work well, he's edited a collection of Berry essays himself, says that this is one of the best introductions. The late, great Phyllis Tickle says it's one of the best books on Wendell Berry she ever read. And our favorite writer about pop culture, David Dark, has a great endorsement here about Bonzo and Stevens and how they bring Berry's witness to bear upon the dim-witted economy and other sorts of problems in our culture. So anyway, this is a great, great book. One of my absolute favorites, not terribly well known. It was published by Brazos Press maybe 15, 20 years ago, and it is a gem. I can't tell you enough about this thoughtful, rich book and why I so like it very, very much. Matt Bonzo and Michael Stevens, kudos to them for being one of the first religious publishers to understand that Wendell Berry was speaking our language. And for those that care about the restoration of creation, the redemption of all things, he is an asset and a tool to help us, again, to develop this kind of imagination. These guys were the first to identify his religious themes and the ways in which we, with this kind of Christian worldview, can really learn from him a lot. So anyway, that's a second one I want to mention. And it is a great, great read, The Cultivation of Life by two great authors up in Grand Rapids.
Great. I'll just insert quickly the impact that this is already having on me about Wendell Berry's work is you've mentioned that he's writing novels, he's writing poetry, he's writing essays, and it's all linked to this worldview that all these things, right? The creatureliness, the thingliness, this world is all being redeemed in Jesus Christ. And it's just hitting me now that it's like he's exercising that by writing in these different styles and relating to us not just in these lofty ideas, but in things that we all can imagine, right? Or
Yep.
possibly even
Yep.
interact with every single day. And there's already a genius about that, to be
Yep.
able to not only talk about all things being redeemed, but model it and then communicate it as well in all these various
Yep.
ways.
I think you're just so right. And you say these kind of things all the time, Phil, which is, I guess, why you like our bookstore and why we like you as a conversation partner so much here, because we talk about big ideas. Books carry great ideas, Christian, biblical thinking, a theological vision for all of life. But yet you have to be able to imagine living that way. And to do that, you need practices and you need models and you need examples. And Wendell Berry walking through the woods and writing a poem about that on Sundays, or writing a story of Andy Catlett or Mars Catlett or Jaber Crow, imagining the stories of what that actually looks like in this imagined community, or telling you about it in his lofty essays, some of which are rather dense, but his great essays, which he's won awards for as a writer. So anyway, yeah, it really does capture this both and, this head and heart, this vision and this practicality. He really gets it. And in part because he is a farmer. He does have a disdain for sort of abstract idealism. He says we should love our place. We should eat real food. We should show hospitality to real friends at real tables. So, he has these sections. Well, one of the books he has actually that somebody edited, they put together all the eating scenes in different novels that he wrote. So they're little page or two excerpts of the meals, of the meal times, of the preparation for real food, of the cooking, and of the fellowship that happens over tables, the hospitality that's often offered over food. And they took all these like food scenes from his novels and put them together in a book and said, you can learn so much about agriculture and food and eating and farming and dining and a Christian philosophy of theology of food by way of just looking how he writes about it in these imagined playful stories. So yeah, Wendell Berry does bring those things together quite well. He's not abstract in that sense. He's down to earth in the most incarnational and sacramental sense that we in the CCO would appreciate. Yeah. Well, would you have time to tell you about one more? This is a little more academic, and I'll just give a shout out to this. It's a hardback. It's kind of expensive, but man, I love this book. It's co-edited by a guy out at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary named Roger Owens. And Roger Owens has written a couple books about the spirituality of the ordinary, about being a contemplative in the ordinary life, kind of the spirituality of the mundane, if you will. So he is himself a contemplative writer. He has a book coming out on praying with children coming soon. So I like Roger Owens a lot. And Roger Owens partnered with Joel James Schumann, who's a medical guy, he's in healthcare, and a poet, I think. And they put together this collection of essays called Wendell Berry and Religion. It's published by Kentucky University Press, not terribly well known since it's a scholarly academic press, but it is edited by them, and the subtitle is Heaven's Earthly Life. Heaven's Earthly Life, Wendell Berry and Religion. And they have all different sort of people like Stanley Hauerwas writing about what would it look like if Wendell Berry ran a university? What would you think like? What would learning be like if you paid attention to land practices the way he does? Brian Volk wrote an essay called "What Would It Look Like if Wendell Berry ran a medical school? If Wendell Berry was learning to be a doctor, and how you could develop this art of healing and wholeness that isn't quite so ultra specialized." Kyle Childress has a chapter on the ministry. Wendell Berry doesn't have too many great things to say about the church and ministry in his novels directly, but man, you could learn a lot as a pastor. And of course, Kyle Childress has an essay about that. He looks at agrarian stuff. Fred Bonson has a beautiful chapter about urban gardening and what we can learn. He calls them defiant gardens in a great feedlot, the salvation of the city. Ellen Davis, who's a professor of Bible and Old Testament Episcopalian scholar at Duke, she has a whole book on this. But in this book, she has a chapter about reading the Bible through agrarian eyes. There's a chapter about our body that Joel James Schumann, who I mentioned is one of the editors, his contribution is how we view our very flesh, our bodies, in light of Wendell Berry's faithful metaphors about our embodied creatures made in the image of God. Norman Wiersbe, who I mentioned before, has a chapter in here on the mystical life, the dark night of the soul, and what spirituality might look like in light of Wendell Berry. So anyway, there's a whole lot of people in here writing great, great stuff on democracy, on theology and practice, on membership, on how we think about the dead and the dying, on hopefulness. There's a chapter called Embedded Hopefulness. So this is a random collection of pieces dedicated to Wendell Berry's work and how his religious themes could affect the doing of theology and embodied Christian living and the nature of the church and the church's worship as it disciples us into whole life discipleship. I think almost every chapter in here is nothing short of brilliant. And whether you skip one or two that don't quite capture your fancy, this is worth every single price, every single dollar. Wendell Berry, it's $40. Wendell Berry and Religion. We have them at 20% off here at Hearts and Minds. And so I gave you 3 levels, 3 books for beginners or those that want sort of an overview, for those that want to dig a little deeper and really see how it affects us in our own cultural mandates. And then this one, Wendell Berry and Religion, that covers a whole range of topics, a little on the academic side. But man, even if you don't know Wendell Berry, these chapters are gems. I really, really like that book a lot. And kudos to the guys that put it out, Joel Schumann and Roger Owens. It's one of our favorites.
It's really cool. I was actually just reading something earlier today about how, follow me, singers, when they are trying to hit their highest note, if they imagine themselves to be like an operatic singer or impersonate a singer that can hit a really high note, they'll actually hit a higher note than what they could beforehand. And I think I'm really impressed with the same sort of imagination of, what would Wendell Berry do in this sector of life, in
Yeah.
this sector of life?
Yeah.
And not to put him on the same level as Apostle Paul, but the Apostle Paul says something similar in 1 Corinthians 11, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And I think we do
Yep.
need these sort of heroes, examples, whatever you want to say, guides in our life that have spent 91 years, right, on this planet,
Yep.
thinking,
Yep.
walking, writing, stewing, and then saying, what would it look like to live life this way with Wendell Berry in mind? And
Yep.
so that last
Yep.
book really impresses upon me to think anew, stretch my own imagination by being guided along by these people that have really thought deeply about these topics. Any last
Hey,
words there for that book or the
well,
episode?
Well, for any CCO friends that are listening in, we mentor students into this vision and we invite them to come to our big Jubilee conference in February. I just want to give a shout out that I know at least one person who will be at Jubilee this year, Gail Hefner, who's written a book about watersheds and caring for stream ecology, restoration of ecology. She has hosted Wendell Berry more than once, has visited him and knows him a bit. And so Gail could tell you a bit about Wendell Berry if you go to her workshop at Jubilee. Another guy that's going to be there is our own friend Keith Martell, who is a leader up at Geneva College, helped teach in the higher ed degree program, which is sort of grew out of a partnership with the CCO, a master's program in higher education. Keith went to visit him and run ideas by him about their learning communities at Geneva at Beaver Falls. And so Keith could tell you stories about hanging out with Wendell Berry on his porch and talking about the very role of the university. It was a very dramatic, interesting story that he has to tell. So a number of our CCO old-time leaders and people that have been with the CCO for a while have been following Wendell Berry for years. And so there's going to be some conversations about that, I'm sure, at this coming Jubilee. So you're not going to want to miss that for sure.
We will, I'm sure we'll hit details on the Jubilee conference here soon. Our registration is just about opening up. So, more details to come on our Jubilee conference in February. But that is a really excellent tease and introduction to some of the topics and people that will be there and presenting and hitting on a lot of things that Wendell Berry speaks to and has certainly influenced the CCO in as well. So, with that, Byron, thank you so much for guiding us through the guides that take us through Wendell Berry and his work. Of course, if you are listening to this and you want to purchase these books, the first link in the show description will take you to the order form at Hearts and Minds Bookstore, and these books are all 20% off due to Byron and Beth and their graciousness towards our listeners. So please do take a moment and order these books from Hearts and Minds, and of course, leave a review, give us a comment, shoot us an email. We'd love to hear feedback, not only on the show, but on these books. We want you to be reading these books and telling us what you think of them and how you might be living them out as well. We love that sort of feedback from you. So, on behalf of Byron, Hearts and Minds, and myself and the CCO, thanks for listening to another episode of the 3 Books from Hearts and Minds podcast.